she looked at the woman sitting in the waiting room and saw a problem. She saw grey-streaked lokes pinned back under a worn canvas hat. She saw a military-issue duffel bag leaning against scuffed boots. She saw someone who didn't belong, health center's priority intake lane. Also, intake coordinator Brenda Sykes decided in the 3 seconds it took her to cross the lobby. What Sykes didn't see was the campaign ribbons that had once sat above the left breast pocket of Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt's dress uniform. She didn't see the 2 tours in Afghanistan, the peacekeeping deployment in Mali, or the 31 years Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt had spent keeping soldiers alive in field hospitals under mortar fire. She didn't see the letter folded in the colonel's jacket pocket, a letter from the Chief of Defense Staff himself, addressed to the hospital's Chief of Medicine, thanking him in advance for his cooperation. Brenda Sykes saw a black woman in her early 50s, sitting quietly with a duffel bag and a paper cup of Tim Hortons coffee, and she made a decision. That decision was about to cost her everything she had built. The waiting room of Maple Ridge Community Health Center smelled like industrial cleaner and old upholstery, the particular scent of a building that had been stretched too thin for too long. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, and the grey light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows made everything look slightly underwater. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt had arrived at 8:15, 15 minutes before her scheduled appointment with Dr. Marcus Obi, the center's Director of Veterans Mental Health Services. She had driven herself from CFB Kingston 4 hours on the 401, which she had done without complaint because that was simply the kind of woman she was. She sat with the stillness that career military people develop without noticing. Her back was straight. Her hands were folded over the duffel bag in her lap. She watched the room the way she had once watched rooftops in Kandahar. Not with anxiety, but with the calm, cataloguing attention of someone whose survival had once depended on knowing who was where and why. She had requested this consultation herself, which was not a small thing. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt was not a woman who asked for help easily. 31 years of leading men and women through situations that did not allow for hesitation had calcified certain habits. But Dr. Obi had a reputation, nationally, within veterans networks. The name Marcus Obi meant someone who understood what service actually did to a person. She had made the appointment 3 months ago. She had rearranged her schedule twice to keep it. She was on time. She had her referral paperwork in the front pocket of her jacket. She had her military health card. She had everything they had asked for. Brenda Sykes appeared from behind the intake desk and walked toward her with the expression of someone preparing to deliver inconvenient news. "Excuse me." Sykes stopped 2 feet away, not quite close enough to be conversational. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, with the tight efficiency of someone who had held a small amount of authority for a long time and had confused it with importance. "This lane is reserved for priority intake patients. The general waiting area is through those doors on your left." Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt looked up. "I have an 8:30 appointment with Dr. Obi. My name is Sarpong-Hewitt." Sykes glanced down at the clipboard she was carrying. "I don't see that here. I was told to check in at the priority intake desk." The colonel's voice was unhurried. She had briefed generals. She was not going to be rattled by a clipboard. The appointment was confirmed by email 3 days ago. "I have the confirmation on my phone if you'd like to see it." "That won't be necessary," Sykes said, in the tone people use when they have already decided. "Priority intake is for patients with current referrals from our internal medical staff. Are you a current patient of this center?" "I'm a new patient." Dr. Obi's office set up the appointment through the Veterans Services intake line. The Veterans Services intake line goes through our general scheduling system. Those patients check in through the main desk. Sykes gestured again toward the doors on the left. "If you head through there, someone will get you sorted out. There may be a wait." Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt did not move immediately. She had learned long ago to give people a moment before concluding they were truly committed to the course they had chosen. "I was specifically told to use this desk," she said. "I have the email." "I'm sure you were told something," Sykes said. And there it was. That small, dismissive lilt at the end of the sentence that was not quite an accusation, but was not quite not one, either. "But I have 12 people behind you who need to be seen, and the priority lane is not for general intake. If you'll please move through to the main waiting area." The woman in the seat to Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt's right, a young white woman with a toddler on her lap, was watching with the quiet discomfort of someone who recognizes an injustice but has not decided whether to name it. The toddler pointed at the colonel's hat and said, "Hat," very seriously. The colonel looked at the child, and the smallest corner of her mouth lifted. Then she looked back at Sykes. "All right," she said. She picked up her duffel bag. She went through the doors on the left. The main waiting area had 43 chairs, a children's play corner with a broken xylophone, and a television mounted too high on the wall, playing a morning news program with the sound off. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt found a seat near the window. She placed her duffel bag on the floor beside her. She checked her watch. 8:22. She was not angry. This was the thing people who had never served sometimes failed to understand about military discipline. It was not the suppression of emotion. It was something quieter and more useful than that. She noted the situation. She assessed her options. She decided she would give the process 20 minutes to correct itself before she involved anyone else. She pulled out her phone and sent a brief message to Dr. Obi's assistant. "Checked in. Was redirected to main waiting area. Letting you know in case there's been a mix-up." She put her phone back in her pocket, folded her hands and waited. At 8:47, she was still waiting. The confirmation email had been clear. The appointment had been confirmed. Dr. Obi's assistant had not yet responded. At the priority intake desk, through the glass doors she could see from her seat, Brenda Sykes was chatting with a colleague, laughing at something on a phone. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt stood up, walked back through the doors, and approached the desk. "I've been waiting for 25 minutes, she said. "My appointment was at 8:30. "Has someone been able to reach Dr. Obi's office?" Sykes looked up. There was a flicker of something. Not quite surprise, not quite irritation, something in between. "As I explained, you're in the general intake system. Wait times can vary. I understand wait times. I've been in field hospitals where wait times meant something considerably more serious than this." The colonel kept her voice level, but she had shifted slightly, the way a person shifts when they decide a conversation is now being recorded in their memory. "I'd like you to call Dr. Obi's office directly and confirm the appointment. His assistant's name is Patricia. I'm not able to call individual offices on behalf of walk-in patients. I am not a walk-in patient. And if you continue to disrupt this desk, I'm going to have to ask security to assist you." Sykes straightened, reclaiming ground. "I've been very patient with you, ma'am. Please return to the waiting area, or I will consider this a refusal of service." The young mother with the toddler had come through the doors now and was watching from a discreet distance. A man in his 60s with a Veterans Legion pin on his lapel had stopped pretending to read his magazine. A teenager near the play corner had his phone in his hand and was making no effort to hide that the camera was pointed at the desk. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt reached into the front pocket of her jacket. She withdrew the letter, the one on DND letterhead, the one signed by the Chief of Defense Staff, and placed it on the desk without drama, the way a person places a card on a table when the game has already been decided. "Before you call security," the colonel said, "I'd suggest you read the second paragraph." Sykes looked at the letter the way someone looks at something they don't want to pick up. Then she picked it up. The lobby went very quiet. Whatever Brenda Sykes had expected the morning to be, it was not this. The letter was addressed to Dr. Terence Park, the hospital's chief of medicine. It outlined Colonel Abina Sarpong-Hewitt's appointment with Dr. Obi as part of an officially sanctioned review of veterans' mental health access in Ontario's Eastern Corridor, a review being conducted on behalf of the Department of National Defence. It described Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt's rank, her 31 years of service, and her current advisory role to the Surgeon General of the Canadian Armed Forces. It politely but unambiguously requested that every courtesy be extended. It was the kind of letter that changed the temperature of a room. Sykes set it down. Her face had done something complicated. This wasn't. We weren't notified. Dr. Obi's office confirmed the appointment 3 days ago, Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt said. I can show you the email again. Sykes picked up her phone. She called someone. The call lasted 45 seconds. When she hung up, she looked like a person who has just understood slowly and completely what they have done. I'm going to. Let me get someone to take you up to Dr. Obi directly. I apologize for the confusion, the colonel supplied, without warmth but also without cruelty. Yes, Sykes's voice had gone thin. For the confusion. A young intake assistant appeared from a side corridor, visibly hurried, and offered to escort Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt upstairs. The colonel picked up her duffel bag. She followed without another word to Sykes, but at the door she paused and looked back at the teenager in the play corner, the one with the phone. "Good morning," she said. The teenager nodded, wide-eyed. He did not lower the phone. Dr. Marcus Obi was a compact man in his late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the manner of someone who has heard a great many things, and been surprised by very few of them. He met Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt at the elevator, which told her something about the kind of man he was. He looked at her face, then at the duffel bag, and said simply, "I heard there was some difficulty downstairs. I'm sorry. Please come in." His office had a window that looked out over the parking lot, and beyond it, a tree line gone orange and yellow with October. There were books on the shelves, not decorative books, but working books, spines cracked and bristling with paper tabs. There were photographs, military groups, formal and informal, a snapshot of Obi himself, in what looked like a medical tent, somewhere very flat, somewhere very... Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt sat down across from him and, for the first time since she'd arrived, allowed herself to settle. "The letter," Obi said, reading something on his desk. "Was that always in your pocket? Or did you have a sense you'd need it?" The colonel looked at him steadily. "I've been a black woman in the Canadian Armed Forces for 31 years, Dr. Obi. I carry the documentation." He looked up. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, which she would not have wanted, but recognition, he said. "Then let's make the time worth it." They talked for 90 minutes. When the colonel finally left his office, she felt 3 degrees lighter in a way she had not expected and could not fully explain. She took the elevator back down to the lobby. The lobby had changed. Dr. Terence Park, the chief of medicine, was standing at the intake desk. He was a tall man with silver hair and the careful, pressured posture of someone who had just received a very uncomfortable phone call. Beside him was a woman the colonel didn't know, with a lanyard identifying her as the centre's director of patient services. Brenda Sykes was also there, no longer behind the desk, but standing in front of it, which meant something different entirely. Park saw the colonel and crossed the lobby to meet her with an outstretched hand and an expression of controlled professional distress. "Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt, I'm Dr. Terence Park. I want to begin by offering my most sincere apology for what happened this morning. What you experienced was completely unacceptable, and I can assure you it does not reflect the values of this institution." The colonel shook his hand. She did not tell him it was fine, because it wasn't, and she had never seen the value in saying things that weren't true. "I appreciate that," she said. "We'll be reviewing our intake protocols immediately, and I want you to know that your access to Dr. Obi's program is fully confirmed for the duration of the review." Park paused. "May I ask, the young man near the play area, was he?" "I have no idea what you're referring to," Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt said. Her eyes were steady and calm. Park nodded slowly. He understood. What neither of them mentioned, though Park clearly knew, was that the video had already been posted. Not by the teenager, or not only by the teenager. The woman with the toddler had been filming too, from a slightly different angle, and she had uploaded it before she'd even reached her car. By the time Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt was walking back to her own vehicle in the parking lot, the clip was sitting at 11,000 views and rising. The title someone had given it was simple: "Intake Coordinator Refuses Black Veteran Colonel at Ontario Health Centre." The internet did the rest. By Thursday morning, the clip had been viewed 2.3 million times. The Toronto Star had run a piece. CB had picked it up by noon, then the Globe and Mail by 3. By Friday, it had crossed into American feeds and come back north again, amplified. Brenda Sykes arrived at work Friday morning to find a knot of cameras outside the centre's main entrance. She put her head down and walked past them without comment. Inside, she was met by HR and asked to step into a meeting room. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. The centre issued a formal public statement that afternoon, expressing deep regret and announcing that the intake coordinator in question had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full review. The statement used the phrase systemic failure 4 times. It announced the creation of a new Veterans Access Liaison position. It committed to mandatory equity and inclusion retraining for all intake staff. Sykes was not named in the statement, but everyone who had seen the video knew who it was. Her Facebook was found by Friday evening. Her LinkedIn was found by Saturday morning. Messages arrived that she couldn't keep up with. Former colleagues expressed their shock, some sincerely and some with the particular speed of people who have sensed which way the current is running. The friend she had been laughing with at the desk. The one she'd been showing something on her phone while a veteran waited in the wrong room. Quietly deleted her own social media accounts. By the following Wednesday, Sykes's administrative leave had been converted to a termination. The center's official language was, "A fundamental breach of the standards of dignity and equity our patients have a right to expect." The union filed a grievance. The grievance went nowhere. The evidence was too clear and too public. Sykes had a son in his 3rd year at Queen's. She had a mortgage in the East End of Kingston. She had a mother in a care facility in Gananoque, whose fees she helped cover. These facts did not change what she had done, but they were not nothing either. Life, as it turns out, has no interest in neat proportions. Consequences do not arrive in exactly the shape of the wrong that caused them. They arrive in the shape of the life they find. What happened next with Brenda Sykes is not the most important part of this story. What is important is what happened 3 weeks later in a community centre gymnasium on Division Street in Kingston, where Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt stood at a folding table surrounded by veterans, men and women in their 20s and their 60s and everything between, people who had served in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia and Helmand Province and the dusty edges of Mali, and listened. She had proposed the round table herself. She had called it, with characteristic understatement, a navigation audit, a systematic effort to understand where veterans were falling through the cracks of civilian healthcare systems in Eastern Ontario. Dr. Obi had co-signed the proposal. The Chief of Defence Staff's office had provided the mandate. 3 MPPs had sent observers. The Colonel did not sit at the head of the table. She sat in the middle of the long side, the way her father had taught her to sit in any meeting where she wanted to actually hear what people were saying. She had a notebook, paper, not a tablet, and she used it. She asked questions, and then was quiet for the answers, which is rarer than it should be. What she heard in that gymnasium became the foundation of a 40-page report delivered to the Provincial Ministry of Health 6 weeks later. The report recommended mandatory veterans liaison training for all health centre intake staff in Ontario. It recommended standardised priority intake protocols for all CF Health-referred patients, regardless of which desk they presented at. It recommended a province-wide audit of incidents where veterans had been rerouted, delayed, or turned away. The ministry accepted 26 of the 40 recommendations. The veterans in that gymnasium had spent years navigating systems that were not designed for them, explaining themselves to people who had not asked good questions, waiting in waiting rooms where they did not belong, and had been told, in one way or another, to move along. The Colonel could not undo any of that, but she could document it. She could put her rank and her name and her 31 years behind the documentation, which is what rank is actually for. On the morning the report was released to the press, a journalist from the CBC called to ask for a comment. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt took the call in her car, parked outside a Tim Hortons in Kingston, her coffee going cold in the cup holder. "What do you want the takeaway to be?" the journalist asked. The Colonel considered that this was never really about me, she said. I had the letter in my pocket. I had 31 years and a rank on my file. I knew who to call. Most people don't have those things. The question the system should be asking is not what happened when it treated me the way it did. The question is how many people it turned away who didn't have a letter and who nobody ever heard from again. She thanked the journalist. She ended the call. She drank her cold coffee. She had another meeting in an hour. There was always another meeting. That was all right. Meetings were where the work happened, if you were willing to do the work and not just attend the meeting, which was a distinction she had tried to teach officers under her command for 3 decades with mixed results. Outside the car window, Kingston was doing its ordinary Tuesday morning things. People walked dogs. A woman wheeled a stroller over a frost-heaved section of sidewalk with the particular determination of parents everywhere. A Canada Post truck idled at a corner. The trees had lost most of their leaves now, and the sky was the flat, promising white of a coming first snow. Colonel Sarpong-Hewitt had been called many things in her career. She had been called difficult. She had been called intense. She had been called, on more than one occasion, a lot for a waiting room. She had never once argued with any of it. She finished her coffee. She started the car. She had work to do. There are people in this world who look at someone and decide, in 3 seconds, what they're worth. They decide based on what they see. The hat, the bag, the color of the skin, the absence of the signals they've been trained to recognize as importance. And most of the time, those people never find out how wrong they were, because the person they dismissed simply moves on, because moving on is less exhausting than explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to listen. But sometimes the person doesn't move on. Sometimes the person sits down in the middle of the room and opens a notebook and asks the questions that haven't been asked, and writes down the answers and puts their name to them and sends them to people who have the power to change something. That's not a story about revenge. It's a story about what happens when the right person decides that being dismissed is not in fact the end of the matter. If that's a story that matters to you, if you've ever been the person told to move to the other waiting room, share this. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, send it to them. We don't tell these stories because they're exceptional. We tell them because they shouldn't have to be.